Sometimes, the greatest lessons about humility happen in the most unexpected places, like a simple store line. It was a typical autumn Saturday in San Francisco, and the Apple Store at Union Square was buzzing with the frenetic energy that only weekend mornings can create. You can sense that there's something in the air of these busy spaces that makes each interaction more intense, more charged with unexpected possibilities. Among dozens of customers eager for technology, a tall and athletic figure quietly pushed through the glass doors of the store. Steph Curry wore a simple cap, a basic t-shirt, and worn sneakers, the perfect uniform of someone who genuinely didn't want to be recognized. How many times in life do the most important moments begin with the simplest intentions? He carried only the essentials in his pockets: wallet, keys, and a crumpled photo of his daughter Riley holding the pieces of a broken iPad. The screen had shattered the night before when the girl tripped during a virtual school presentation. Her tears still echoed in his memory like a sad melody that refuses to leave one's head. "Daddy, can you fix it?" she had asked with that teary voice that melts any paternal heart. Steph had promised he would find a solution, even if it meant facing crowds of fans in a busy store. On the other side of the Apple Store, Marcus Chen adjusted his blue polo shirt for the 10th time that morning. At 32 years old, he had climbed rapidly through the company hierarchy, driven by an ambition that burned in his veins like pure fuel. It's impossible not to feel that some people carry the weight of proving their worth every moment of the day. Marcus obsessively checked the sales numbers on his corporate iPad. Today was special. Apple executives from Cupertino were making a surprise visit to evaluate the store's performance. He knew that a positive impression could catapult him to the regional management position he so dreamed of. Great opportunities demand flawless performances. The store pulsed with the familiar rhythm of premium retail. Overlapping conversations, constant electronic notifications, the soft hum of air conditioning mixed with urban noise seeping through the doors. Steph observed the movement for a few seconds, mentally calculating how long a simple purchase would take. The line for personal service snaked through the store like a lazy serpent, filled with people holding broken devices, frustrated parents trying to control, bored children, and young professionals impatiently checking their watches. Steph positioned himself naturally at the end of the line, as any ordinary customer would do. Marcus circulated through the store with the authority of someone who knows every inch of the territory. His professional radar captured every detail: hesitant customers who needed approach, misplaced products that demanded correction, employees who could be more proactive. What's most impressive is how some people transform vigilance into obsession. 15 minutes passed. Steph waited patiently, occasionally responding to messages from Isha about family lunchtime. There was no rush. Saturdays were sacred for moments like these, small rituals of fatherhood that were worth any inconvenience. The line advanced slowly, punctuated by complex transactions and detailed technical explanations. Steph observed the interactions around him, noticing how each employee had their own service style. Some were warm and patient, others more direct and efficient. All seemed genuinely interested in helping, except Marcus. When Steph's turn finally came, he naturally approached the counter where Marcus was typing something on the computer. "Good afternoon," Steph said politely. "I'd like to buy an iPad for my daughter. Hers broke yesterday and—" "Hey!" Marcus interrupted abruptly, raising his head with an expression that mixed irritation and superiority. His eyes scanned Steph from top to bottom, registering the casual clothes and unpretentious posture. "Did you cut in line?" Steph blinked, confused. "No, I was waiting over there." He pointed behind him, where there were still some people waiting. "I don't care where you were. Marcus said, his voice loaded with exaggerated authority. "Go back to the line and wait like everyone else. This isn't a drive-through, it's not your house, and you don't have special privileges." The words cut through the store's air like a sharp blade. Nearby conversations diminished. In volume, heads turned subtly toward the confrontation. The ambient sound of the Apple Store, soft music, friendly conversations, device clicks, was momentarily overpowered by an embarrassing silence. Steph remained motionless for a few seconds, processing what had just happened. There was no anger in his eyes, just genuine surprise mixed with something that seemed like sadness. How many times in life are we judged by appearances before our humanity is recognized? "Of course," Steph responded, softly, his voice maintaining the same initial politeness. "Sorry for the misunderstanding." He turned calmly and returned to the end of the line, which had now grown considerably. Some customers watched him with confused expressions. There was something about that man that didn't fit the embarrassing situation they had just witnessed. Marcus returned his attention to the computer screen, satisfied for having maintained order in his store. After all, treating everyone equally was a sign of professionalism, right? Rules existed to be followed, hierarchies to be respected. But something had changed in that Apple Store's atmosphere. A different energy began to circulate among customers, almost imperceptible whispers spread like concentric waves. And Steph Curry, now back at the end of the line, was about to teach a lesson about class and character that no one in that store would ever forget. Sometimes, the greatest transformations begin with the smallest gestures of humility. There are moments in life when true greatness reveals itself, not when we are exalted, but when we are diminished, and we choose to remain dignified. Steph Curry positioned himself calmly at the end of the line, which now had at least 15 people ahead of him. The embarrassment of the previous moment still hung in the air like a heavy cloud, but he took a deep breath and simply accepted the situation. You can sense that some people possess a natural serenity that transforms humiliation into an opportunity for growth. The first person to notice something different was a teenager of approximately 16 years old, who was 3 positions ahead of him in line. She looked discreetly over her shoulder, frowning as if trying to solve a familiar puzzle. "It's not possible," she whispered to her friend beside her. "That guy looks like—" "Like who?" the friend asked, turning subtly to observe. "Steph Curry," the first girl responded in a low voice, her eyes widening with discovery. "It's him. I'm sure it's him." The news began to spread through the line like invisible waves of recognition. Discreet whispers multiplied, heads turned with growing curiosity, and a completely new energy began to circulate through the space. It's impossible not to feel when something extraordinary is happening right under our noses. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his activities with the satisfaction of someone who had solved a problem. He observed the growing movement in the line with a sharp, professional radar, but interpreted the whispers as simple, typical impatience from customers in long lines. "Some people don't know how to wait," he murmured to a colleague, adjusting his blue polo shirt again. "Good thing I made it clear from the beginning that here everyone is treated equally." The colleague, a young employee named Tyler, cast a confused look toward the line. There was something happening that Marcus wasn't catching, but Tyler couldn't identify exactly what. 5 positions. Ahead of Steph, a situation familiar to any parent began to unfold. A woman of approximately 40 years old was with her 8-year-old son, who clearly showed characteristics of the autism spectrum. The boy repetitively flapped his hands and made low sounds of discomfort, evident signs of sensory overload. "Calm down, Jake," the mother whispered lovingly, trying to soothe him. "Just a little longer, and we'll leave, okay?" But Jake was progressively losing control. The bright lights of the EBE store, the noise of conversations, the proximity of strangers, everything combined into a sensory storm that his nervous system couldn't process. How many times do we witness the silent desperation of parents who do their best in impossible situations? Steph observed the scene with an understanding that went beyond casual sympathy. His experience with children, especially through the social programs he supported, had taught him to recognize these delicate moments. What's most impressive is how true compassion doesn't need introductions or credentials. Discreetly, Steph approached the family. "Excuse me," he said softly to the mother. "May I try to help?" The woman looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. "He gets overwhelmed in busy places," she explained, her voice loaded with emotional exhaustion. "We're just trying to exchange his iPad that stopped working." Steph crouched down to Jake's height, maintaining a respectful distance. "Hi, champ," he said in a low, calm voice. "I know it's difficult with all this noise. Want to see a cool trick?" Jake stopped flapping his hands and looked curiously at Steph. There was something in that stranger's calm energy that instantly soothed him. Steph took a coin from his pocket and began to make it dribble between his fingers with smooth and hypnotic movements. "See? It's like the coin is a really tiny basketball," he explained, creating a visual rhythm that completely captured Jake's attention. The boy smiled for the first time since entering the store. His breathing normalized, the repetitive movements ceased, and he became fascinated with the demonstration. "Wow," the mother whispered, tears of relief forming in her eyes. "How did you—" "I have experience with children," Steph responded simply, continuing the coin trick. "Each one is special in their own way." The interaction was drawing positive attention from other customers in line. People smiled, some discreetly recorded with cell phones, and the general mood of the store had changed from impatience to admiration. It was evident they were witnessing something special. Marcus, however, interpreted the growing movement as a potential security problem. "Tyler," he called his colleague, "go see what's happening in the line. If someone's causing trouble, you handle it." Tyler headed discreetly to the area where Steph was interacting with Jake. When he got closer and clearly saw who the troublemaker was, his face instantly paled. "Mr. Chen," Tyler quickly returned to Marcus, his voice trembling slightly. "Sir, you need to see something." "Later, Tyler. I'm checking the numbers for the executives," Marcus responded without lifting his eyes from the screen. "But sir, it's important. That customer you sent back to the line. What about him? Is he causing problems?" "He is. He's Steph Curry." Marcus finally lifted his eyes, an expression of confusion taking over his face. "Steph who?" "Steph Curry, the basketball player. From the NBA. From the Golden State Warriors," Tyler explained, his voice loaded with growing urgency. The realization began to infiltrate Marcus's mind like ice water. Slowly, very slowly, he turned his head toward the line and saw Steph still crouched beside Jake, doing coin tricks while the child laughed delightfully. Have you ever wondered what the exact moment feels like when we realize we've made an irreversible mistake? Marcus felt his stomach sink like a stone thrown into deep waters. The key implications of the situation began to materialize in his mind like pieces of a nightmare assembling. He had yelled at Steph Curry in front of dozens of customers on the day Apple executives were visiting the store. "Mr. Chen," Tyler whispered urgently, What do we do? Marcus couldn't speak. He watched Steph continue his gentle interaction with Jake, completely oblivious to the panic that was settling in the manager's mind. The humility and class with which Steph had accepted the rude treatment now became even more devastating to Marcus's ego. Suddenly, he realized that other employees had also recognized the special customer. Looks of disbelief and concern circulated among the staff like telegraphic alarm messages. But what disturbed Marcus most wasn't who Steph was, but how he was behaving. Even after being publicly humiliated, he chose to use his time in line to help a child in difficulties. Great leadership doesn't manifest in trophies and recognition, but in small acts of kindness when no one is expecting. The situation was about to completely escape Marcus's control, and the worst was yet to come. There are moments in life when reality hits us with the force of an emotional earthquake, and there's no way to pretend the ground isn't shaking beneath our feet. The news that Steph Curry was in the store spread through the Apple Store team like an uncontrolled fire. Employees communicated through desperate looks and urgent whispers, all processing the magnitude of the disaster Marcus had created without even realizing it. "My God," whispered Sarah, a veteran employee of 5 years. He yelled at Steph Curry, in front of everyone, on the day of the executive's visit. Tyler tried to maintain composure, but his hands visibly trembled while he pretended to organize products on nearby shelves. You can sense that there are situations when collective panic becomes almost palpable in the air. The store's atmosphere had completely changed, charged with ATD tension that made each second feel like an eternity. Meanwhile, Steph continued his natural interaction with Jake and his mother, completely oblivious to the silent chaos his presence had unleashed among the employees. He had taught Jake 3 different coin tricks and was now patiently explaining how the iPad works in a more sensory way for children on the autism spectrum. "See, Jake?" Steph was saying softly, showing accessibility settings on the demonstration device. "You can make the screen less bright and the sounds softer. This way, it's more comfortable for you." Jake's mother watched with tears of gratitude. No one ever explained these things to him this way," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. It was then that a middle-aged woman, 2 positions back in line, definitively recognized the voice she was hearing. "Steph?" she called hesitantly. "Steph Curry?" Steph turned with a genuine smile. "Hi. Yes, that's me." "My God," the woman exclaimed, covering her mouth with her hands. "I can't believe it. My husband died last year, and watching you play was one of the few things that still made him smile during cancer treatment." The emotional confession echoed through the store like a shared prayer. Other customers began to approach, not to ask for autographs or photos, but to share similar personal stories. It's impossible not to feel when we're witnessing something much greater than a simple coincidence. "Mr. Curry," said a Latino man of approximately 50 years old, "my son had to quit basketball after a car accident. When he saw you talk about overcoming challenges in an interview, he decided to go back to studying, and now he's in college." Each story was like an open window to the real impact Steph had on people's lives, far beyond basketball courts. And Marcus observed all this from afar, feeling his professional world crumbling like a house of cards on a windy day. What disturbed him most wasn't just having yelled at a popular celebrity, but realizing he had attacked someone who clearly dedicated his life to elevating other people. How is it possible that we attack precisely those who represent the best of humanity? It was at this moment that Marcus noticed something that made his blood freeze in his veins. 2 men in suits, whom he had assumed were regular customers, were observing the entire situation with expressions of absolute disbelief. They discreetly held Apple corporate badges. The Cupertino executives, they had witnessed everything. The rude treatment, the public humiliation, and now they were seeing how Steph responded with class, while Marcus entered silent panic. "Tyler!" Marcus called urgently, his voice loaded with barely disguised desperation. "I need you to resolve this situation now." "What exactly do you want me to do, sir?" Tyler asked, genuinely confused. "Go there and offer VIP service to him. Private room, special coffee, whatever he wants. Quick." Tyler looked at Marcus as if he had completely lost his mind. "Sir, with all due respect, don't you think that will seem a bit desperate?" "I don't care what it will seem like," Marcus exploded, his voice echoing throughout the entire store. Conversation stopped, heads turned, and the embarrassing silence that followed was deafening. Steph looked in Marcus's direction, his eyes meeting the manager's across the distance. There was no anger in that look, no satisfaction at the embarrassing situation. There was something much more disturbing. There was pity. Tyler hesitantly approached Steph. "Mr. Curry," he said in a low voice, "my manager would like to offer our VIP service. Private room, personalized service." Steph listened politely, then smiled gently. "Thank you for the offer, Tyler. But I don't need anything special. I just want to buy an iPad for my daughter, like any father would do." Steph's simple and dignified response echoed through the store like a life lesson in real time. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone refuses privileges they could easily accept? There was something deeply powerful in how he maintained his humility, even when the situation turned in his favor. At this moment, a teenager who had initially recognized Steph began recording a video with her phone. "Guys," she whispered to the camera, "you won't believe what's happening here. Steph Curry was humiliated by the Apple Store manager, had to go back to the end of the line, and look how he's reacting." She filmed Steph interacting lovingly with Jake, listening attentively to other customers' stories, and politely refusing special treatment. The video captured not just the events, but the transformative energy of someone who chooses elevation instead of humiliation. Marcus realized he was being filmed and felt a new wave of panic. His career, his reputation, his promotion dreams, everything was being documented in real time for potentially millions of people to see. "Stop filming!" he yelled at the teenager, heading toward her with hurried steps. "You can't film here. It's private property." Actually, one of the Apple executives approached calmly. "She can film, and I suggest you stop yelling at customers." Marcus turned and saw the executive discreetly showing his corporate badge. The world around him seemed to collapse in slow motion. "Sir," the executive continued, his voice cold as ice, "I need to speak with you. Now." While Marcus was being taken for a conversation that would certainly define the rest of his career, Steph finally reached the front of the line. A different employee, clearly nervous but trying to maintain professionalism, served him with all possible courtesy. "How can I help you today, Mr. Curry?" "I just need a basic iPad," Steph responded with the same simplicity he had maintained throughout the entire experience. "My daughter broke hers, and I promised I'd buy a new one." The line that had witnessed the entire situation applauded spontaneously. Not a forced or ceremonious applause, but genuine recognition of how someone can maintain dignity in difficult circumstances. And there, in the middle of a busy Apple store in San Francisco, a lesson about true greatness was being taught without words, documented for the world, and forever engraved in the memory of all who had the privilege to witness it. Reality had knocked on Marcus's door. Now it remained only to discover if he would have the courage to open it. Some of the greatest human transformations happen not when we are punished for our mistakes, but when we are forgiven for them. 30 minutes had passed since Steph completed his purchase. The iPad was wrapped in a simple bag, but the real transformation that had occurred in that Apple store was much more valuable than any technological product. You can sense that sometimes the most important gifts are the lessons we carry home. Marcus was sitting in a chair in the back office, staring fixedly at the trembling hands in his lap. The conversation with Apple executives had been brutal but necessary, an honest assessment of how pride and insecurity can destroy everything we work so hard for. 24 hours, the main executive had said. You have 24 hours to prove you deserve a second chance. How you resolve this can determine whether you remain with the company. It was then that Steph Curry did something no one expected. Instead of leaving the store with his purchase, he headed to the office where Marcus was isolated. "Excuse me," Steph said gently, knocking on the open door. "May I come in?" Marcus lifted his head, his eyes red from stress and regret. You don't need to. I ruined everything," he stuttered, unable to form complete sentences. Steph entered the small office and closed the door behind him. "May I sit?" he asked, pointing to an empty chair. Marcus nodded, still in shock that Steph Curry wanted to talk to him after everything that had happened. "What's your name?" Steph asked, his voice loaded with a gentleness that disarms any defense. Marcus Chen," he responded, his voice barely a whisper. "Marcus," Steph repeated, as if he were engraving the name in memory. "How old are you?" 32. "I was also 32 once," Steph said with a sad smile. "And I made many mistakes at that age, some public, some private, but all painful." Marcus looked at him with surprise. It was impossible to imagine Steph Curry making embarrassing mistakes. "You know what?" Steph continued, leaning slightly forward. "When I was your age, I was going through a terrible phase in my career. Constant criticism, injuries, people saying I would never be great enough. Do you know what I did with that frustration?" Marcus shook his head, genuinely curious. "I took it out on the people closest to me. Family, friends, employees, anyone who was in the way when I was feeling inadequate." Steph paused, letting the words settle. "It's easier to make other people feel small when we feel small. It's impossible not to feel that we're witnessing a moment of authentic vulnerability between two men who, deep down, face the same universal fears." "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "Because I recognize the pain behind the anger," Steph responded simply. "You didn't attack me today. You attacked your own insecurities." Marcus broke. 20 years of pressure to be perfect, to prove his worth, to compensate for all the moments when he felt inferior. Everything crumbled like a dam that finally gives way. "My parents immigrated with nothing," he confessed between sobs. "They worked 16 hours a day to give me opportunities. I feel like I need to be perfect to honor their sacrifice. And then, today I humiliated you in front of everyone because you just seemed normal." Steph placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Normal is all I ever wanted to be. And your parents didn't sacrifice so you could be perfect. They sacrificed so you could be free to be human." Have you ever wondered what happens when someone sees us exactly as we are and chooses to love us anyway? Marcus was experiencing this transformative grace for the first time in his adult life. "What do I do now?" Marcus asked, his voice loaded with genuine regret. "You learn," Steph responded. "And then you teach. Every time you feel like diminishing someone to make yourself feel bigger, you remember this moment, and you choose elevation instead of humiliation." They talked for 15 more minutes. Steph shared stories about pressure, about expectations, about how to learn to lead with humility instead of authority. Marcus opened his heart about fears, about the weight of representing his family, about how success can become a prison when we don't know who we are without it. When they left the office together, the store had transformed into something completely different. The teenagers' video was already circulating on social media, but not in the way Marcus had feared. The focus wasn't on the humiliation Marcus had caused. The focus was on Steph Curry's response, how he went back to the line without complaining, how he helped Jake with patience and care, how he refused VIP treatment, how he chose human connection instead of privilege. "Guys," the teenager was saying in the video that already had thousands of views, "this is what real leadership looks like. It's not about how you act when you're at the top. It's about how you treat people when you could easily be cruel." What's most impressive is how a story about conflict had transformed into a lesson about grace. 3 days later, Marcus was still working at the Apple Store. Not because the executives decided to ignore the incident, but because Steph Curry had personally called them, sharing the conversation they had, and recommending that Marcus receive a second chance. The store became an unexpected symbol of redemption. Customers came specifically to see the place where that viral Steph Curry story had happened. And Marcus had become one of the most empathetic and effective employees the company had ever had. Steph framed a simple photo in his home, Riley smiling with her new iPad. But beside it, he placed a handwritten note from Marcus. "Thank you for teaching me that greatness isn't never falling. It's how we get up when we fall." Because in the end, the lesson that went viral wasn't about a celebrity being disrespected. It was about a man choosing to transform humiliation into humanity. And sometimes, those are the most important lessons of all.